What's up everyone? Coach Tony from Bombeck Strength, and today I want to talk about a common misconception that a lot of coaches and lifters fall victim to when it comes to trying to induce progressive overload. Now, progressive overload is the most important training principle that you want to abide by when you're training, because in order to get bigger and get stronger, you have to induce progressive overload by doing more than what you've done in the past. In order to get your body to adapt, to grow bigger and to grow stronger, you have to present it with some sort of challenge that it has not faced before. So that typically comes in the form of lifting heavier and or performing more training volume, more overall sets and reps. What I see a lot of coaches say to their lifters with the best of intentions is that there are lots of different ways to induce progressive overload beyond just lifting more weight or increasing volume. And this may be true. There are sneaky ways to induce progressive overload, but they all kind of come back to kind of tricking you into doing more weight and or more sets and reps. But the most common ones that I see coaches tell lifters that I simply don't agree with is if you do the same weight with better technique, if you do the same weight at a lower RPE, and or if you perform the same amount of work in less time. Those are really three ways that I see a lot of coaches being like, hey, don't just focus on doing more weight or doing more volume. You can do X, Y, Z and still get better, still induce progressive overload. And it may kind of be semantics here, but that's simply not true, because just by definition, if you take the same weight and you do it with better technique, that weight is less challenging now. So it's not going to induce progressive overload the same way. If you do the same weight but the RPE is lower, it's certainly less challenging. You've gotten stronger, so that same relative weight is no longer as challenging and won't induce the same amount of progressive overload. Let's say you squatted 315 last week at a 9 RPE, and this week you squatted it, it's an 8. Now it's by definition easier, so the same weight is no longer applying the same stimulus. So to truly induce progressive overload, you've got to go heavier in order to get to that same RPE. Are you still going to get some benefit from that workout? Certainly, and there's nothing wrong with kind of like staggering or waving or undulating your training intensity, whatever you want to call it, but the gradual trend line needs to be heavier. So if you did 315 week 1, 9 RPE, 315 week 2, 8 RPE, you better well go heavier the next week if you want to keep that kind of upward trend of progressive overload to continue to challenge yourself. And the final one that I spoke about, doing the same amount of work in less time, that's great from a training economy standpoint, but what that should allow you to do is then do more work. So if you've allotted yourself 2 hours to train, and week 1 you got the work done in 2 hours, and then week 2 you do the same amount of work and you do it an hour and a half, you've got that extra 30 minutes where you should continue to train and do more work overall to induce that progressive overload. I think the misnomer here is that those three things that coaches say, again with the best of intentions to try to open their minds of their lifters and help them see the bigger picture and be process oriented instead of results oriented. I think what they're trying to say is that progressive overload doesn't have to be like every single training session, one after another in perpetuity. You can kind of drag out your progressive overload over a longer period of time. When you're first starting to train, you may very well do more every single training session for a certain amount of time. It's kind of your newbie gain stage, and that stage is a blessing. You should absolutely try to milk as much progress out of that phase of your training as possible, knowing that it has a finite lifespan, that you're not going to be able to do that forever. The stronger you get, kind of bigger picture view you have to have, and you're going to induce progressive overload over a much broader range of time. You're not going to be able to tack on 5 pounds to the bar every single session. You're not going to be able to add an additional set to each exercise every single session. That's impossible. Nobody can do that. You kind of have to measure more things and say, okay, am I doing more overall work? Am I adding weight to the bar over a certain period of time, over maybe a 3-week period or a 6-week period or a 3-month period? You got to have that broader lens, because you're not able to have quite as incremental progress anymore, because again, the human body does not want to adapt. It does everything it can to stay as it is. You have to force it out of homeostasis via progressive overload. When you're trying to induce progressive overload, just remember that you do have to do more than you've done in the past. And that's why you just can't do the same weight over and over and expect improvements in technique. to get you there. You can't do the same weight over and over and over until the RPE drops to a certain amount. You have to continue to challenge yourself. And if you find yourself getting more efficient with your workouts and completing the same amount of work in less time, use that extra time to do more work. That's where you should be adding volume to your accessory exercises, maybe increasing the amount of conditioning that you're doing to help improve your recovery. Maybe that's extra time that you can use to pay attention to the mobility work and the soft tissue work that you never do. Use that time wisely, and just remember that there's no getting around doing the work. You have to continue to work harder and harder and do more and more over time if you want to keep getting bigger and stronger.